Okay, we are live. Everybody, welcome back to the second week of the Workplace Wanderer. Something I'm very proud of doing this LinkedIn Live, and I feel like there's a podcast I've been listening to that probably so many others listen to called Smartless, and it's Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, and Sean Hayes, and their whole goal is to learn from their guests. And while they have tons of intelligence between the three of them, the goal for them is to really not chime in with their perspective on things too much, and really ask as many questions and learn from experts in different areas of varying topics. So that is my goal with the Workplace Wanderer. While I feel like I do know quite a bit about this, there is so much that I have to learn, and there's people in all different areas that can teach us. So I'm really happy to have Anthony Meek here today as a guest on our second episode of the Workplace Wanderer. So welcome, Anthony.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
I appreciate having you. You and I have been connecting back and forth quite a bit. Am I allowed to say what we'll be journeying on in the next few years?
Yes.
So Anthony has also been accepted to the same doctoral program as I. We're both going to be leadership psychologists in the next decade, as we just talked about. We'll both be going through the same program at the same time, working our way together through it. So I'm super excited about that. It's nice to have a friendly face going through the same program, and we can bounce ideas off of each other.
Absolutely. I feel the same way.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it. So anybody who joins us on here, I do want to ask that feel free to comment, feel free just to chime in to say hello. If you have questions that we don't cover, we'll definitely get to them. The more comments, the more engagement we get, the more people can learn from the topic we're discussing. So I've decided to implement something new on our second episode. I think as we grow, we'll keep implementing new things and seeing what works and what doesn't. But there's something called the Next Level Cards of Progress that we created, which is about 35 or so cards with varying questions that ask ourselves to dig a little bit deeper into ourselves. And it really helps to start as a conversation starter, to help foster an environment of vulnerability and authenticity. So I'm going to pick a card at random. I mean, I didn't shuffle, or I didn't, pick the deck. I'm really just going to pick a random one. I'll ask the question to you. You'll be the first one to answer, and then I'll answer the question as well. This is just a bit of an icebreaker for us to jump into the conversation. What are 3 values that you strive to live by, and are you honoring them currently?
That's a great question. I strive to be authentic. I strive to be compassionate, and I strive to be the best leader as I possibly can on a daily basis, whether that's in my personal life or business. Really, really helping those around me bring out their talents and really having an impact on the world around me.
Wow. Again, I think you and I are on the same page quite a bit. Do you feel like you're honoring those values at this point?
Yes.
Great.
Yes. I have taken, I have suffered from my own burnout over the last, I would say, especially during COVID, being in a leadership role in healthcare. It definitely took its toll on, I think, many of us. And I mean, even before, I kind of saw signs of going down the burnout path, but especially during COVID, I think for many of us, burnout set in. And, I don't necessarily view it as a negative situation, because it allowed me to take a step back and reevaluate my priorities. But also, I had to take a step back because it affected my physical health too.
Okay.
So fortunately now everything is good. But sometimes we have to take a step back and really focus on ourselves for probably once in our lives. And that's what I decided to do over the last several months, was actually take a step back and reevaluate my goals, but also start a business focusing on burnout, and then also pursue further education in this realm.
Yeah, no, that's great. And there's a bunch of things that I'm pulling out of what you're saying. And I have so many questions even going into this conversation about burnout. I guess I will start by just going through mine. I made you do the card. I should do the card as well. I would say remaining teachable is one of mine. Integrity, I believe, is a core value of mine that I don't think that I had prior to finding recovery from a substance use disorder. I think it's something that I developed over time. And I would say empathy, is a core value of mine. And interestingly enough, I think that's a great transition into the conversation of burnout. I find that most of my periods of burnout come from when I'm working with a lot of clients that are experiencing burnout or experiencing a difficult situation, and the empathetic nature that I've had my whole life, which is why I think part of the substance use disorder developed. I think I take on a lot of people's emotions, particularly their negative emotions, and that tends to lead me to burnout. So I have to self-care more than most, I would say, to avoid that piece of like kind of the empathetic burnout. And so moving into this a little bit, I think when we talk about burnout, we've all experienced it. And I think as research comes out and more, we learn more and more about these types of topics. We understand that most disorders and most issues we face that pertain to mental health are not an on and off switch. It's not a yes or no black and white answer. They're really more of a spectrum that we move towards extreme burnout from, maybe mild, moderate, severe, just like the other spectrums that we deal with pertaining to other disorders. And I think when we talk about burnout, it's important for us to have that bit of self-awareness to where we are at on the spectrum. We're all going to experience burnout in some degree. So I'm wondering if you could start by telling us what burnout actually is. And I know that's a general question and it's very broad, but what is actually going on psychologically, physiologically? What is burnout?
So burnout is an excessive form of stress. Burnout will manifest in our bodies. We will start to feel apathetic. We will start to feel tired and irritable and distracted and even inadequate. We start to lose connections with others. If you notice yourself starting to pull back from others, that's also a sign of burnout. For me personally, I experienced those, but what I also, experienced was physical pains and muscle pains. And as well as my overall health was declining. For example, certain blood panels were off. My liver was even off because that extreme form of stress actually takes its effect on our bodies.
I'm smiling not because your liver was off. I'm sure Sarah, who works for us, is listening right now. I have been going through a journey over the past few days with some blood work results, and I'm wondering if burnout has something to do with it.
It definitely could. Definitely could. And I never thought so because I always chalked it up to genetics. But when you really take a deep dive and you're not taking care of ourselves, our bodies are going to suffer from that. But also feeling trapped and hopelessness and even depression, indecisiveness, brain fog are all signs of burnout. I know I experienced brain fog, and I really didn't, when I was going through it, I really didn't know what it was. I just thought it was, I didn't really know. I wasn't even expecting it. But it's like you're going through each day in a fog because your brain is actually trying to recover from it too.
Mm.
Burnout specifically, affects our prefrontal cortex.
Okay.
So it takes time for, our brains to recover as well.
So for those of people who don't know, what is our prefrontal cortex responsible for in terms of
higher level functioning?
Okay. Okay. I do want to say Dr. Enan Rudell just hopped in the chat and said, what a timely discussion. I think both of us can honestly say, and he'll be actually a guest in 2 weeks on this to talk about a very important topic as well. But I think both Anthony and I can confidently say that he's a great ambassador for William James College and is probably the reason both of us have decided to attend that program. So
absolutely
glad he's here to listen in on the conversation, and we definitely appreciate having them in the comment section. So moving a little bit deeper into burnout, you talked about some of the signs and symptoms that we can expect to experience. Let's start with one. How can one triage if you're experiencing burnout symptoms? What do we need to do? First of all, how do we know that we're going through some burnout symptoms? What can we look at and say, okay, this is due to burnout, not due to anything else going on? And what do we need to do to sort of triage the situation?
One of the most helpful tools is to seek assistance and guidance from whether it's a therapist or coach or even your doctor. Because what I did was I actually went to my doctor, and she actually said that these are all signs of burnout. So she was able to triage, as well, because sometimes, and I know for myself, I become so focused on what I'm doing and the mission at hand. For example, being in healthcare, helping as many people as I can, helping my teams along. As a therapist, I want to help as many people as I can. Sometimes we forget to take care of ourselves, and it helps to have an outside perspective, weigh in on sometimes what we're going through. But also really taking inventory about how we're physically feeling, because sometimes we lose sight of that, and also mentally too. And then, comparing it to the burnout symptoms, because most of us, I know I have some clients right now that came in when they started to see me. They were manifesting depression and anxiety. Digging deeper, it was because of burnout. So really being able to seek help when we need it, and that's often the hardest piece of this, is to actually seek help when we need it. Sometimes we think that we could just do it on our own.
Okay. And it also means sometimes having to put a full stop on whatever's contributing to that burnout, at least for a period of time. And that's also the other scariest part. I mean, asking for help or taking the time to get to triage yourself and overcome some of the burnout is very difficult. So it sort of leads me to another question: is there a certain archetype or certain person or worker that is more susceptible to burnout?
I would say more of the type A personalities are more susceptible to burnout, but also more of the higher achievers too are also more susceptible to burnout. But in our society, I see burnout more prevalent in those individuals, but burnout can happen to anyone, no matter what your personality type is.
Yeah, right. And I think the topic is so timely, as Dr. Rudell said. I think coming out of the pandemic, I think a lot of us thought of a lot of the burnout issues that we were dealing with during the pandemic, of trying to manage like this alarming rate of anxiety just throughout the whole world, mixed with trying to adapt to virtual, mixed with the pressures of everything else that was going on, the fear. I think we thought that the burnout was going to really start to reside, and it was just really more of a temporary sort of like trauma response to what we were all going through. And I think we're all seeing that that's not the case. And it's actually, things are getting worse now in workplaces as we move out of the pandemic. and more employees and more people are experiencing burnout. People who, you can't even just say employees. I think just people in general are experiencing like a general sense of burnout just with life. And I think we talk about there are certain types that are more susceptible to it, but as you mentioned, I think now it's more of a blanket statement that it's something that all of us need to be aware of and to avoid.
And especially work definitely contributes to burnout, but also, our personal lives can also contribute to burnout. It's a combination of all of those things combined. And my entire goal is to get to the root of what's causing it so I can, help the individual most effectively and most efficiently, because we have to get to the root of what's causing whatever we're going through, whatever pain we're going through. So that's the first step, is to get to the core of what's causing it, because then the treatment plan can be set up and, you can actually start to heal.
Yeah.
And for me, it took more of an extreme situation for me to realize. But the hardest part, like you said, for me was to actually take a step back, because I loved the people that I worked with. I loved just making a difference, but also a part of that is making a difference in our own lives too.
Yeah. There's a presentation that I've been doing for a while now to different organizations, and I don't want to say it's lighthearted and cheesy, because the topic sounds lighthearted and cheesy, and it's leading with kindness. And I loved it. In my master's, it was a topic that I focused so often on, was kindness and compassion. And I think it comes from stuff that I've went through as a child. And I've always felt like I was the nice guy who finishes last, and that I'm often stepped on. And there's been some even examples recently where, because I am the nice guy, because I'm the quiet one, it's sort of like my needs are put last by other people. And that's part of the conversation, is that that I talk about, though, is that it's not something I'm willing to give up. And I would rather be the kind and empathetic and compassionate leader, because in the long run, we don't finish last. I believe that kindness, compassion, empathy are actually the winners in the end. And
I agree.
The other ways of leading lead to more burnout. They lead to more employee turnover. They lead to more dissatisfaction. And so I'm sticking to my guns on that one. But the reason I bring that up is, within that presentation, the only way that we can always be kind and compassionate towards others and empathetic is if we are truly taking care of ourselves. And there's a good 4 or 5 slides that are all about self-care. If we can expect to give, we have to take as well.
Absolutely.
So that self-care piece is really important. You brought up a few other really great topics throughout what you just said a few minutes ago, though, as well. And I can't help but wonder, during your journey of burnout, what was the final straw? Was it the physical issues that you were going on? And what was it that kind of gave you that courage to say, okay, enough is enough. I'm going to take the time I need. I'm going to make a change, because that's scary as hell. So what did you do? How did you approach that situation? And what was the Band-Aid rip? What did that look like?
That's a great question. I remember sitting in my doctor's office, and I just remember her reviewing with me that the blood panels were getting worse. And also my liver was not functioning at maximum capacity, as well as the extreme sense of exhaustion and fatigue. I knew in my heart, if I didn't make a change, I don't know where I would be today. I mean, it would have kept on getting worse.
Yeah.
And at that point, I wanted to be healthy for my family and my loved ones and, everyone in my life. And also, another component that impacted this was a personal loss that I faced in my own life of my own spouse a few years ago, which came to light more during the pandemic. Because when we're so physically exhausted, and even when we experience a form of trauma like the pandemic, other forms can actually, or other things in our life that have caused trauma can actually come to light. So for me, it was not just my workplace, it was also things that I had to deal with.
Yeah.
And that was honestly the hardest part, is to go through both of those at the same time. But looking back, like it took me maybe 5 months to get my health completely back to normal. That was because I was focusing on it constantly.
Right.
And then I remember just the brain fog starting to lift some, and just me feeling better overall. But taking that step back was the hardest thing, one of the hardest things I've had to do.
Yeah. I can only imagine. You know, we have something at Next Level that we almost force each other to take days off. I can't even say almost. We force each other to take days off. And I remember Amanda towards the beginning of the new year was just in this place of just emotions and burnout and all of this. And we just were like, hey, guess what? There's a hotel room booked for you at this beach. You're going there. And that's it. You're taking all the calls. You got it. About 2 weeks ago, she did the same thing for me. It was like, hey, she even called my wife to make sure that my wife is not allowing me near my computer. And it was basically like, you are taking this day off. You're taking from Friday afternoon through the weekend, all the way through Monday until Tuesday. You're off. You're not doing anything work related. Don't answer an email. Don't call anybody. And we do the same thing with Sarah. And we're really, with all of our team, there's this sort of employee first approach that we have where it's, and I will say this, that it's sustainable right now. I'm interested to see as the company grows, how we switch it around, because we're small. So we were able to take an employee first approach because we know that if our employees are taken care of, they'll take better care of our clients. It's just a simple model. But that belief to us, and the dangers and the fear that we have of experiencing burnout and having our team members experience burnout, we know what it can lead to. Another topic that in terms of burnout that I was hearing the other day, and I was kind of pondering about a couple of days ago when I was thinking about this conversation, was actually, you touched on it earlier, about the idea that it's not just work that burns us out. It's balancing everything in our life that burns us out. And, you know, I think through a typical day, right? For myself, it's like, go to the gym in the morning. So balancing my physical health. I have to remember to eat throughout the day. I have to work all day long. We got to do all the other stuff that comes along with work, the social medias, the marketing, the talking, all the stuff that we have to do. Then after work, I have to manage my personal recovery from substance use disorder. And then I have to also manage personal relationships, make sure I'm catering time to my wife, taking care of the dog, taking care of the house responsibilities. And it's this difficult journey where it doesn't feel like there's ever a break. There's never a stop of where I don't have something I have to do or a responsibility. And it got me thinking that the idea of striving in our culture for this work-life balance is honestly stressful and burns me out also. And what it ends up happening, and I think for myself and for a lot of people, is that striving for work-life balance means filling your schedule up with something to do at all times. And it's not really balance. It's not really rest.
You have touched it right upon the head there, because it ultimately boils down to the expectations from society. We learn these things as I'm growing up, because we live in a society that is constantly moving and going. And sometimes taking time for ourselves is looked at and viewed upon as, that someone's being lazy. But in reality, we need to take time for ourselves, whether that is going for a 15-minute walk or talking to a friend for 15 minutes or doing something for you, for us to continue doing what we're currently doing. And the first thing that I really realized with myself is really being able to tap into how I'm feeling, both physically and mentally. And by doing that, I can approach things a little bit differently. For example, if I'm feeling tired, or if I'm starting to feel down, or just, fatigue, setting time aside for me, it doesn't have to be a long period of time, but our bodies will tell us exactly what we need to do. It's just us being able to listen to our bodies.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I teach my own clients. And that's something that I think that's something that's not focused enough on in our society, is really touching base with ourselves first.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can go down a whole systemic rabbit hole of the materialistic and external nature of our entire culture is all about outside appearances, outside stimuli, outside rewards. And we're not really, it's very rare for people to really talk about the spiritual or the looking inwards. But I think you're absolutely right. And that's such a big piece of this, is I think it starts with self-awareness and being able to recognize our needs and what we need to do, and being able to act upon those needs is the next piece. For me, I introduced meditation, which I've dabbled with for, I don't know, however long, where I'll get really good for a while and then stop, get really good for a while, stop. And I think this has been the first period where I've really tried to remain consistent. Because I figured out I was doing it wrong. I was trying to force it in the morning every day. And where I actually need meditation and where I find the most benefits is when I squeeze it in to the afternoon hours of the day, when I'm the most stressed out, is when I need to take those 10 minutes. And that's where I feel the effects and the rejuvenation from it. So this moves us a little bit more towards, I want to talk about the topic of the solution of burnout. And I want to specifically focus on workplace and organizational structure. What is it? Where does it begin within organizations right now? If an organization wanted to bring you in and say, okay, we have an issue with burnout, where do we start?
First, I would actually provide education on burnout, because oftentimes we as a society have no idea what even burnout even is. And by helping people identify that they could have burnout is the first step, is to acknowledging it. Also bringing in, doing presentations on just mental health in general, and really advocating a culture that centers around mental health in general. So really the education piece comes first. I also have an assessment that I do to actually gauge exactly what's causing the burnout, because we also have to address that, as well.
By the way, anybody who's in the comments, anybody who wants to jump in, ask any questions, feel free. This is an opportunity for us to all interact here. So I appreciate everybody who's on here listening, but anybody who wants to jump in the comments, feel free to do it. And I can see the comments as we're talking, so I'll throw in some of those conversations. So that's where we start with education. The question that came to my mind, and I want to run with it, is how do we make burnout and mental health concerns, how do we make them relatable to the common person? I think typically people automatically become defensive, like that can't happen to me, that's not me. So how do we word burnout, or how do we discuss it? Or is it the symptoms that you list and all of a sudden people go, holy shit, I have that? How do we help them understand and accept that burnout's okay?
A lot of times it's me going over the symptoms is what helps people gain that insight into they could possibly have burnout. Because once we see the symptoms, in front of us, we can relate to it better than just saying burnout just in general.
Right. And I think it goes to stereotypes. Like if I say, substance use disorder, there's a stereotype, there's a stigma there. There's the same thing with burnout. You sort of picture like a guy dragging ass, essentially, like just exhausted and can't function at all. And you're not picturing somebody who's dealing with this underlying current of anxiety, or who has this brain fog, or having issues at home because they're so just drained from their work day. So they're fighting with everybody. They're not laughing as much as they used to. All of these things are signs and symptoms of burnout that I think actually make it more palatable and kind of reduce that stigma. Again, reminding people that it's a spectrum and it's not a yes or no. Yes, you're burnt out. No, you're not. You don't have to be extremely burnt out to be burnt out.
Correct. I mean, I have even given presentations on addiction, and burnout has come up. So just bringing mental health awareness more into the workplace will help people gain insight into their own feelings.
I'm happy to hear you say that. And part of it is because it's validating. That's where we start as well, is that there's no point in trying to make changes until people understand what you're trying to change.
Correct.
So it's the education piece. It has to come first. People have to understand what they're going through, what they're experiencing. And by just educating people on it in a relatable, palatable way, it automatically reduces the stigma. It also gets the conversation started so that people feel more comfortable confronting what they're struggling with.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what moves next? So we do the assessment, and in a general sense, I don't want to give away your whole bag of tricks, but in a general sense, what are we looking to do in a culture of an organization? What are we looking to do? What changes are we looking to make? Let me actually go back. What does an ideal culture look like that fosters an environment where people aren't going to experience burnout as much?
That's a very good question. So an environment that's more team-oriented and team-centered is going to foster less burnout. An environment that promotes open communication and also transparency. Something that and this is just going back from my personal experience in leadership, one thing that I made sure to do was include my team in the goal setting, that we did. So it's not just coming from one person, it's a team effort. And when people feel a connection to one another, they feel that they belong in a different way, and which counteracts burnout, in a way. So in a team-oriented environment, that is where I see less burnout. Some of the other things that I have personally done was more team development and team building to really help the cohesiveness of a team really prosper. Because I know for myself, when I'm part of a team, there's that energy where you can bounce off of one another.
Yeah. No, I agree.
An environment that provides recognition to their employees. An environment that promotes autonomy. Really assessing your staff's strengths and making sure that they're using those strengths in their current role. And that they also have a sense of purpose of what they're doing. because one of the first signs that I've noticed was once individuals lose that sense of purpose, burnout will set in very, very quickly. And then more on a macro level is more of the leadership development and trainings on helping leaders promote a culture more of mental wellness. Okay.
I think there's, I mean, again, my mind is buzzing with different ways to go with this. What I'm hearing you say, though, is ultimately creating an environment of psychological safety, removing some of the fear from it, removing some of the siloing that can tend to take place in workplaces where it's all on my shoulders to handle this enormous task. It's interesting because I sit here and I go, all of that is so simple.
Yeah.
It's so freaking simple to make an environment that honestly just seems happy and positive to me. And it's a cultural change, and it seems like a long-term success plan in my mind. And it's just so uncommon, though.
It is.
And I've had the pleasure to work for companies that foster that type of environment where, like, I want to say work hard, play hard, but it's not even the play hard that people think of where everyone like goes out drinking. It's more of the, it's a fun, collaborative, creative, project-oriented environment where we're all working together as a team for a common goal. We feel a part of something. We feel empowered to be our own individual, though at the same time, and like we belong no matter who we are. And it was such a simple way to approach things, to just kind of let people know that they're safe. And that's really was at the base of it all, was that, hey, you don't have to be anybody else while you're here. Just be you. You have the strengths that we need. We hired you for a reason. But I've also had the opposite of a privilege of working for programs and places that are not that, and where there is a sense of fear, and that almost like the car dealership mentality. It's like you go from hero to zero on the first of every month. And it's basically like who you are doesn't matter. It's the numbers you produce. And if you don't produce, you're gone, buddy. So it's just interesting to hear how simple this really could be, but it's so not commonly done. And I think it really goes back to leaders and organizations are doing what they're comfortable with.
Correct.
And what's been done for so long, and they don't want to make the changes, regardless of how simple those changes are.
And like you said, change is not easy.
Yeah.
It's, and I know the employers that I've had the privilege of working with were open to making the changes. They just didn't know how. Because when we're talking about mental health in general, a lot of people don't know. There's still a stigma around mental health, which is lessening some, but people just don't know how to approach mental health. And that's the first step, is the education piece and really getting to the root issue of what's causing the organizational burnout.
I know you watched it, and I appreciate you taking the time to do so. We put out a video that talked a little bit about this. It's called Mental Health Matters, and it's on our YouTube page. But there's a little bit about this of where I make a point to reassure, hey, by the way, we're not trying to turn you into a therapist here. You don't have to be a therapist to be compassionate or caring or know how to talk to people in a way that makes them feel psychologically safe. So that's what I imagine that most leaders and most people are expecting, that it's going to be this whole overhaul. And they're going again to the extreme, to this stigma of the situation. Oh God, we're going to bring in people to help change our culture, and it's going to be more mental health friendly, and it's going to be a bunch of people crying everywhere. And it's like, no, that's not what this is. It's really more about empowerment and growth and team building culture. And I think if people actually saw that and they felt the difference and were willing to put in the long-term commitment to it, of even just looking where they're at as an organization, at one point and waiting, doing this stuff and then looking at it again a year later, I think they would just see how much happier and how much more positive they feel. Unfortunately, I feel like the society has shaped us for that instant gratification, and it bleeds into the corporate culture of wanting to bring somebody in to just do the education piece and hope that that's going to fix the problem. If it doesn't, okay, this stuff doesn't work. We're going to go back to how we were doing things before.
Absolutely.
So it is an important piece. And in terms of burnout and discussing burnout and preventing burnout, I think people need to recognize, especially leaders, that, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, this is a long-term commitment you're making to your community, to your culture, to your company, and to its long-term success.
And when we start addressing these areas with companies, sometimes I know we all fear that by focusing on certain things, the profitability is going to decrease, the revenue is going to decrease, employee retention is going to decrease. But by focusing on these areas, those will actually all improve by actually focusing on the team dynamics. Because we have to have a strong team to carry out our mission.
Right.
But I truly believe there's a lot of fear making a change, especially in a corporate setting.
I guess that goes back to where the education piece is so important. Talking to the leaders is so important to help them understand that they're investing in their company, not just to say that they care about their employees, but it's actually going to help the company's bottom line.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that's what they need to know and recognize. And I can't talk about it enough. I feel like I've brought it up too many times almost at this point, but the Simon Sinek thing just keeps playing in my head about the infinite game. And I know you and I have even talked about it, but it's that idea of, it's like people just want to do what they have to do to look good in the moment. And it's the same with companies. They want to look good for the quarter, and they're not thinking big picture.
Correct.
And we have to move away from that mentality. And you're going to look at companies like even Walgreens, companies like that, they've succeeded because they've thought long-term this entire time. And they're not about winning the quarter. They're willing to lose a quarter in order to win the year.
Absolutely.
Or win the decade. So we have to start shifting the way that we think about that. Rudy jumped in here in the comments, said even the stigma of mental health is in the mental health industry. It's so true.
100% agree.
I just was putting something together yesterday, actually, about ways that we can start working on helping the behavioral health industry and the programs. I think that it suffers from it more than most, honestly. It's a lot of people who are very empathetic, and they're all in there just burning the candle at both ends.
And I've seen that a lot over on my career, especially in the behavioral health field, where more attention needs to be brought to these areas.
Now, Rudy works with you, correct?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
So tell me what's on the agenda for you. I know we're starting school up here in August, so we'll see how that goes. But what's on the agenda for you? What are you focusing on? Where are you going with all of this? What's your biggest goal moving forward?
Naturally, to continue to focus on the business, but also to put myself first and self-care first as well, and continuing to learn how to do that. Because entering school in August, there's definitely going to be stressors involved, but we're going to be able to handle those stressors a lot differently than if we didn't really take time to really get in touch with ourselves.
Yeah.
So basically doing what I'm doing now, I'm continuing to focus on this, but also self-care on my own end, which isn't always easy to do. And continuing to help others do the same thing.
I love it. I love it. And I love that you put yourself first with that. I think it's very indicative of how much work that you've done on this and how you actually walk the walk instead of just talking the talk. I think by you even mentioning that is it makes it very clear that this is an important topic to you, and you recognize that if you're burnt out, you can't help anybody.
No.
So, we had a conversation as a team the other day where we have Dr. Hutman on our team, who's a mentor of mine, and he's our clinical lead over here. And we actually hired him for an hour to basically educate us on burnout, on transference, countertransference, and how to really help separate ourselves. There was a comment that he made. I was losing some sleep over a client. And there was a comment he made, not in an insensitive way, and I want to make that clear. But he basically said, like, at this point in your career, you shouldn't be losing sleep over a client. And because you have to be able to turn it off. And you need your sleep in order if you want to help that client. And I was like, we're like, what the hell does that mean? What does that mean? How do I do that? So we had this conversation, and I wear this this monitor that monitors my heart rate, and it shows on a graph how my heart rate is throughout the day. And it was from 5 to 6 p.m. was this conversation, and my heart rate was like at 123, 125, almost 130 during this conversation, because it threatened my very existence as a person. And it really was a challenge to me, and a very poignant reminder. I need to take care of myself. I can't help others. And if I'm physically responding to this topic this strongly, then there's some more work to be done. So I love this topic. I think the work you're doing is so important. I appreciate your dedication to this. And I appreciate the reminder. And I hope everybody who's listening or who watches this afterwards, which these things tend to get more traction after we're done filming. I hope that everybody who watches this can take away one thing from this conversation, and they can go take a 10-minute walk. They can take a moment to themselves and recognize that rest is okay. You can take a break. You can do it. Allow yourself to do it. You will be better for it.
Yes, I completely agree.
Well, thank you, man. I really appreciate you joining me, and I look forward to being in class with you.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. This was an awesome conversation. Thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you.
So we will be back. We're taking next week off because I'm traveling next week. We'll be back the following Wednesday at 11 a.m. I'll be talking to Dr. Enan Rudell. The topic we are going to be discussing is having difficult conversations at work. I cannot wait for this conversation. I am so fascinated and interested on this topic that I have a list of like 400 questions that I'm going to talk his ear off. I doubt he's still listening at this point. I would be surprised he's got an hour to contribute for the whole day to listen to us go back and forth about this topic, but I'm very excited to talk to him next couple weeks. So thank you everybody for watching The Workplace Wanderer. If you have any idea of anybody who wants to be a guest or should be a guest on this, please just shoot me a DM and I will make sure that person gets on here. We are talking about all topics related to workplace wellness, mental health, management, leadership, any topic related to the workplace. We are here to discuss it, to break it down, and to talk about how we can make the workplace better. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.